Welcome to the Excel Executive. We will continue from our last video. So in this video, before we started, this is the table that we are using and this is the pivot table that we created using this data. So in this video, I will cover the two contextual tabs that come whenever you create a pivot table. Now these are the tabs. First is called the Pivot Table Analyze and the second is called the Design tab. So whenever you have created a pivot table, you use some specific options in these two tabs which help you make your analysis more meaningful. So I will show you only the options that I personally use, and for all the other options you can look at them on the internet if you like, but I don't think they will be necessary for the basic analysis capabilities for which these pivot tables are very helpful. So let us begin. So first is the pivot table name. Normally I don't change it, but if you like, you can change the name. So let's say we can call it groceries pivot. And now you see that the name has changed. Now this shows you the active field or the active column. So right now it says a category. So if I click any one of these shops, it will change to shop and so on and so forth, depending on the data that you have in the pivot table. Next is drill up and drill down. I don't use those. These are the expand and collapse field options. So right now the pivot table is expanded. So you have the shop name first, and then you have the category. So if I collapse it, it will show you the shop name. And if you want to expand all of those, you can click this button, or you can use this plus minus sign if you want to do them individually. Then group selection. Let me just go back here. Yeah, group selection, I don't use those. And let me just expand them first. And ungroup, I don't use them either. Now we have this part, the insert slicer and insert timeline. So this is basically a fancy filter options. If you want to filter the data, so let's say I take out the category, I take out the shop, and I add in the item name, and I want to filter it shop wise. So I can drag the shop option in the filter box, and let's say I want to filter it by grocery shop. I click it, I click OK, and it will filter the data. So the total is $149, and now it says $48, and I can reset it by clicking the all option. That is one way. The other way is to insert a slicer. So once you click the option, you have all the columns available, and in this case we will click shop and click OK, and it will have a visual representation of the filter with its own options. So you have the name of the slicers or the slicer heading. So it's shop. If I change it to shops, it's gonna change it. You can change different colors. You can break it forward or backward. This comes handy when you have multiple charts and multiple slicers on a single page. And once we are done with this and we start creating dashboards, then these 4-5 options will become very helpful. And this is the most important option here, report connections. So what happens is that if you have multiple graphs in a dashboard and you want all of them to be affected by this slicer, then you use this option to connect all those charts and graphs with this slicer. We will use this option when we start with the dashboard part. Anyways, so if I click one of the options, same, if I want to filter by grocery shop, it is going to filter it like this. And if I want to filter it with the vegetable shop, I click that button. As you can see, this is selected, this isn't. You want to reset it, you click this button, and if you select multiple options from a slicer, I mean this slicer only has 2 options, but normally it will have multiple options. So for multi-select, you use this option. So this is what a slicer is. I'm going to click back into the pivot table and go back to the pivot table analyze tab. So the second option is insert timeline. So for time related columns, so by that I mean that columns which contain dates, you use this option. Now you can use this option as well. Let me show you what the difference is. It's much helpful much better looking when you use the insert timeline option. So let's say I use the first option. I click insert slicer, I click the purchase date, click OK, and it will be something similar like this one. So if I want to see which items are purchased on 9th September, I can click it and it will work fine. But the way it is presented is not very impressive. So I'm going to delete it and I'm going to use the other option, insert a timeline. So this option only shows you the columns which have dates in it. So in our table, we only have one column, purchase date. I click OK. And this is a much better representation of the same slicer. So if I want to see all the purchases made in August, I'm gonna click August and it will filter it down. And you can check it by looking at our table because it has very few entries. So you can see that these two items, which are iceberg and noodles, and it shows the same data here. And you can clear the filter like this. I'm gonna click in the pivot table again, go back to the contextual tab. So we are done with these two. I don't use this option. Refresh is when you change something in the data, and that will not show immediately in the pivot table. So let me show you what I mean. So the total is 149 cent, $49.20, and it's the same here. But let's say I change the quantity of soda from 2 to 3. So it changed, and the total is now 158.7, but it's not showing here. So for that, you go to this option and you have two options, a refresh and a refresh all. So in our case, we only have a single pivot table. If you have multiple pivot tables and you want to refresh them all in one go, then you use this option. But in this case, the first option is going to work out just fine. So we click it and you can see that the pivot table is updated as well. The next option is a change data source. So I normally don't use it to change the data source normally, but you can do that as well. What I normally use it for is sometimes I receive an Excel file which has a lot of sheets and a lot of tables, and I have a pivot table with which I'm working, and I want to see the data. In that case, I will go here, change data source, and it will show me the name of the table or the range. In our case, it's a table, that is why it is showing us the name of the table. If it were a range, it would show us the range. And by this, I can see that where the data is coming from for that specific pivot table. Then I don't use these options. This In this fields, items, and sets, I only use a calculated field. So if I click it, it will open up a bar, and you can use all the columns from that table, and you can enter formulas to create custom fields for this pivot table. It will not show in the data, but it will be available in the pivot table. We will use this feature later. Next is the pivot chart. So like other charts, but these are much more interactive. So for that, we use these two options, pivot charts. So this bit, these options are referred as a field list. If I click it, it's going to turn it off. And if I click it again, it's going to turn it on. Field headers, I keep it at the default settings, and plus minus buttons, you want to show it or you want to hide it. It's not showing here because we only have one item in the rows. If I, let's say, bring the shop in as well, you see these plus minus buttons. If you don't want to see them for any reason, you can use this, but normally it's better to keep it on. The next is the design tab. Here we have subtotals. So these are the subtotals. For grocery shop, the subtotal is 57.5. For the vegetable, it's 101.2. For some reason you don't want to see it, you can use this option. If you want to see it again, you can use this option. Same for grand totals. If you want to turn it off, you can. If you want to turn it on, you can do the same. Let's use this option. Then we have the report layout. We have 4 layouts. Let me just move the pivot table here. So this is the first layout, the compact one. The outline looks something like this. So we have all the row items in separate columns here, as you can see. Next is the tabular form, and next is that if you want to repeat all items, and if you don't want to repeat item labels. So what happens is that we do this, and what I would normally do is that I will turn on the subtotals, and then I will turn on the report all items. And in this way, it resembles a table. Sometimes this becomes very helpful, but in most cases, you are not going to use it. So in most cases, we will just not repeat it and we will keep the layout in the compact form. This is normally how I use it, and I think this is one of the best ways to use it. So it should be in this form, and I always turn on the subtotals at the top of the group. This is the view that I normally use. Then you have some format related options, so you can change the color, you can change how the column headers and row headers look, and so on and so forth. So that is all for this video. In the next video, we will, I think, create some charts and graphs from these pivot tables. Please do all the good stuff, like, subscribe, share, and comment, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.